what I'd like to do is show you a piece of my current work and then kind of go backwards and explain my creative process and what led me to this point, which I think is really important. All the work that you're going to look at is, I've made it because it's fun to me. There's a little more to it than that, but that's an underlying factor, is that I wouldn't make this work unless it was enjoyable to make. But going back to where kind of visual arts has entered my life, really didn't happen until after my first not so successful semester at Plymouth State, where I thought I would study environmental science, which didn't go over so well in like an intro class, so I had to reconsider things. So I thought, well, what could I do that I really enjoy? I love music. Music drives a lot of the things that I do and the decisions that I make. So I thought I'll study, guitar. I've taught myself how to play guitar. I've played in bands. I don't know how to read music, so that wasn't a really good option either. And so I really need to make a decision because school is expensive. And so I'm thinking I really like to work with kids, so maybe I'll become a teacher because I enjoy working with kids, and Plymouth has a great degree for that. So I thought, what should I teach? I wasn't really sure. And then I realized I spent a lot of time with a sketchbook, kind of doodling in my dorm room. And I thought, all right, I'm going to give art ed a shot. So kind of entered the program, not knowing anything. I couldn't draw to save my life for the most part. But I went through the whole program and it was great. But I left and got a job, bought a house, got married. So my whole art making experience took a back seat for quite a while. And not until Labor Day of 2011, went up to Waterbury, Vermont, and checked out this great brewery. And on the door there was this painting that caught my eye, and I said, I need to make that. Like, I need to explore, what this woman has done. Everything about it really interests me. So, that kind of reignited the fire of like, do something, make some more art. Here's a nice little close-up. Just super interested with the line, the mark making, just the energy and what was going on there. So, a little background on kind of some artists that have been super impactful in my life. Some of Jackson Pollock's early work, which has a lot of figurative movement to it. Also, some of Keith Haring's work, his line work, which is really flat, almost maze-like. I really enjoy it. So then, made this first piece in 2012, which I painted on insulation foam, which I had a lot of in my classroom. We would take foam with my students and we would cut it up. And we would look at Elizabeth Murray, who's one of my favorite artists. And it's fun and it's playful. And so I had all this foam to paint on. So I started exploring what could I do with the paint. I had lit student quality paint, which wasn't that great, but I had a lot of it, so I could toss it around and experiment with this piece here. I'm going to put some paint down and make a lot of circles, and then start to pull some things from the background. That was kind of the beginning of exploring with paint. Here's another piece I used some glue bottles and watered down paint, and just kind of let things happen, and then did that same thing. Just take from the background and see what I could get from it. Here's a good example of not putting anything down and just trying to, find a style, I suppose. And I was really drawn to line-heavy work and focus on using line as a way to build a composition. So I continued this whole process. These two examples right here are examples of, I had a lot of paintings. I had like 5 or 6 of them going on. And I'd get to a lot of points in a lot of paintings that I was done with them, or I felt like I had, overworked them, and then I would leave them. These two paintings, I decided I would paint over them, and quickly I discovered that I created a little bit of space here, and I really liked what was going on there. So I thought, this is something interesting. And then later on, I would become super interested in Harold Dunham's work from the early 80s. And he goes on to talk about, he made about 50 paintings, and then he painted over them, so they were ghost paintings. So what he learned from that is that you can learn a lot from painting over some work that isn't working. So it made a lot of sense that what I was doing back in 2012. So that was kind of reassuring thought. So eventually I entered, this is the first studio course in the program. Still working with the foam, just cutting it out with a styro cutter and building off of foam and exploring that in a couple different ways. Also using the styro cutter, I could take pieces out of a painting that weren't working, which was great. Just cut them right out. And yeah, so it's like a big eraser. And I also liked that it was breaking up the rectangle that conventional or standard rectangle frame. That's another example of that. So the whole time I'm still exploring with line, just trying to dabble in a little bit of everything and see what works, what doesn't work. At the same time, making a lot of, started to make some mark making that almost resembled writing, but not quite. And that's something that I quickly put in, the toolbox of ideas and thoughts that I had and continue to use as well. So this was kind of a really interesting piece that I made. So this entire time it's a process, it's trial and error. I'm trying to figure out what works. And I was reminded by a quote from Elizabeth Murray's work, where she says that she's painting and she's painting and painting until the right thing happens. And that has always kind of stuck in my head as something that lets me know that I can continue to do what I feel is right, and eventually I'll get there. So this was the end of the first studio course, and this is kind of like a painting that had done it for me. I killed it in a bad way. I had really just overdone the line. I was sick of working just with line. I was using it as a crutch and wanted to go somewhere else with my work. So the first summer studio course, I decided to go back to some things I had worked with in undergrad, which was some kind of organic shapes, and trying to create a little bit more space. And these paintings took a little bit longer to make, which for some reason I felt like was a good thing. Like I was more invested in them because they took longer. At the same time, they were not as successful in building the type of form that I wanted to get out of the work, but I knew that it was still worth pursuing. So I left that summer studio course with kind of two options. This wanting to discover how to build form a little bit more believable, and then also still enjoying some of the line work that I had worked on prior to. So I decided I would try and do a little bit of both. So I do some fast sketches, like this is a quick 15-minute sketch with markers or paint markers combination. And then at this time I was officially introduced to Carol Dunham's work and really struck by how he has these very organic shapes that are very believable, and then he also uses some really flat, kind of line-heavy things, and he's really married them together, in my opinion. And he's painting on wood. So everything about that really kind of struck home to me and said, this is possible, you can do it in your own way. So that's kind of this piece was kind of a response to that. Doesn't look anything like it, but it was something that I wanted to continue to explore. At the same time, I'm working on some paper and using some different materials, and kind of discovered this, what I know is like a flower, but really not thinking of it as a flower, but more of something that's blooming and is energetic and it has some movement to it. And so I decided to use this form and continue to see where it would go. At the same time, I realized how important sketching is, and sketching is, I always thought it was kind of like a waste of time. It's just like get to your work and start painting, which is completely untrue in my opinion. I think that just the sketching, constantly sketching, whatever you could, really informs larger work and more invested work that you can do. So I would do sketches like this. I have like hundreds of them. At staff meetings, I'm notorious for taking notes. Everyone knows what I'm doing. And they're okay with it, which is great. these larger and bigger paintings, which at this point I also invested in artist quality paint and decided to kind of abandon the acrylic student grade stuff. And I could immediately notice the difference in the pigment, and everything about it felt really exciting. So this one and one before were two paintings on the second spring studio course. So I took all of this, which I was feeling really excited about, and entered the summer studio last year with a lot of ideas and things to explore. There were a lot of forms that started to kind of just present themselves. And at the same time, I learned how to use an acrylic medium and start to use glazes. You can see some of the forms are a lot more believable than the ones I just showed you. At the same time, I'm still really interested in throwing in some really flat line and seeing how those two things work together. Still a lot going on here, and I think something that I've been trying to work on is giving some places for the eye to rest. But still, I'm having a lot of fun during this whole summer residency and exploring what's happening here. The other thing that was really interesting is I could create a lot of transparency, and so I could start to put shapes through other shapes and let layers start to exist, and so space or more space becomes a lot more apparent here. So I left that last year's summer residency with a couple questions that I needed to answer, which were what were my intentions and what is this work about? Which I'm sure some of you are asking yourself that. And it just happened. And I couldn't answer those questions for a while. I just started to do studies, things that kept coming up in drawings, and was more focused on the formal qualities and composition and color and those sorts of things, although I was kind of avoiding that question. And it wasn't until more recently, writing a thesis paper and starting to do a lot of research that I started looking into the unconscious, the subconscious. Started looking at some of Sigmund Freud's work and his influence on surrealist painters and writers, which also led me to the whole practice of automatism, which is how these works and my paintings are created is kind of just a very loose sketch, no plan, and then they start to build themselves and they kind of develop on their own. Of course, I'm the one drawing them and painting them. And so I realized at that point that my intentions were capturing these moments of spontaneity and getting them out onto the paper. So I felt really good about coming to that conclusion. And then these drawings, and these are watercolors, and started to really unfold, and they were quick. I set one of these up in 20 minutes or so, and then I could go back in with mark making and things like that. So I felt like I was onto something there, and all of these kind of what I would call studies, kind of a place in between the sketchbook and my acrylic paintings, eventually kind of unfolded, and I really got to understand what the meaning behind all of this work was. And the meaning, I think, or I know, it lies with the role of the viewer. And so I have my own thoughts that are going on, which have nothing to do most of the time with what is actually being drawn, but you're going to have your own. And I think that through that process and what you can take from it, how you can interact with a painting like this is going to be completely different for each person. And that's the fun of it, and that's where I'll leave you. So thank you.